called for the receiver, as Wendy, who now worked at the other end of life's spectrum as a midwife, groaned in exasperation. The bedside phone always seemed to ring a few hours after she returned from one of her marathon shifts. I fumbled with the receiver, holding it the wrong way up, but even at a distance I could clearly hear the booming voice of Professor Johnson.
"Morning, Everett. It's the Prof. I'm in the PM room with a very nasty case. Get down here ASAP."
I struggled out of bed and into my suit and staggered out into what was a beautiful September dawn. As I strode along the narrow path that ran from my flat to the park behind the mortuary, I was surprised to see several dog handlers, their hands' noses to the soil in ferocious concentration. Police cars were parked outside, and several uniformed and plain-clothed officers were in the yard. To my great surprise, a dog handler was in the PM room with his mutt. "Get that thing out of here," I exclaimed to the startled handler. "What the hell do you think you're doing in here with that creature?" The officer apologized and hurried out. Professor Johnson was already there, pacing up and down, having, unusually for him, ignored the dog. Only the room's sidelights were on, leaving the table shrouded in shadows, but I could see enough to tell me that the body of a child was lying upon it. The Prof stopped pacing when he saw me and snapped, "It's not him." I switched on the overhead light and saw the body was of a girl about 5 years old, wearing a yellow dress. One of her shoes was missing. We'd been expecting to receive a call about 6-year-old Barry Lewis, who'd vanished while playing near his home in Walworth some days earlier.
"This is Stacey Kavanagh, 4 years old," Professor Johnson continued. "Police found her in Southwark Park after she was reported abducted from the communal gardens of their block of flats. A neighbour found one of her shoes there."
"Where's the murder squad?" I asked, starting to prep the room.
"Still at the scene. Another little girl's missing, Stacey's friend, Tina Beechuk. She's 7.
Pat arrived moments later and, immediately reading the situation, joined us in silent preparation. It was a genuine relief to me to have Pat by my side, for in the 2 years since starting at Southwark, this mild-mannered, unflappable Irishman had proven himself to be utterly reliable. Freshly promoted Detective Chief Inspector, DCI, Doogie Campbell arrived shortly after, along with 2 detectives, the police photographer, and Cliff Smith, the lab liaison officer. We nodded our hellos. The scene was far too sad for a good morning, and we worked quietly, just speaking when necessary, to give the details for the PM record. Despite our grim task, it was comforting to be among professionals, all doing a very difficult job, the importance of which united us all in a common cause. Nothing would be missed, no stone would go unturned in the search for justice, to bring some sense of closure to Stacey's parents, who were no doubt extremely distressed, having to face the day that every parent dreads. There were no defense injuries, a sign that perhaps Stacey had known her killer. She hadn't been sexually abused, something we'd all suspected given the number of child abductions that had taken place in recent months. Not only was Barry Lewis missing, the sexually abused body of 3-year-old Leonie Keating had recently been found bound and gagged in a Suffolk canal. In fact, the only injury to little Stacey was the one that had killed her: strangulation.
"It wasn't with bare hands," Professor Johnson explained. "From the markings, I can tell that some kind of ligature was used. As to the type, I would suggest a cord. As to the material, I can't say. There might be hemp fibres in her clothes if someone was using rope, but that's for Mr. Smith's colleagues to find out."
As the days went on and there was no sign of Tina, the streets of Bermondsey were transformed. Children no longer played outside. Local residents formed vigilante groups, performing their own searches and patrols, questioning anyone they thought looked like a stranger, sometimes becoming quite aggressive, especially when the strangers turned out to be members of the press that had flooded into the area, desperate to get any kind of scoop. Dozens of police officers searched houses, wooded glades, and the Docklands area. They became a familiar sight to the residents of the block of flats where the 2 girls had lived, a grey brick tenement that overlooked wasteland, beyond which were visible the cranes of the Docklands. "At least they're united in tragedy," Pat said later that week, thinking about the girls' families.